As I said, my name is Dr. Stephen Henriksen. I'm a neuroscientist. In fact, I spent some of my early career here at the Salk Institute in the early part of my career, and so it's very nice to be back again and seeing that the architecture is being kept up in some way, as we see out in the patio. What I'm going to be talking about today and introducing is the second part of the contributed papers that we have received, and ANFA made for the call of papers for the meeting. If I'm not incorrect, I believe there were over 160 applications for either talks, presentations, or posters. And there was a committee that was formed by Michael Arbib, actually, by the request of the board to look at those abstracts and determine which ones were worthy of presentation. Actually, all of them were very excellent, but we had to make a vetting of them because, of course, we didn't have that much time to allow everybody to produce a talk or a poster. What Dr. Arbib did was to convene a panel of 5 individuals, which included 3 neuroscientists and 2 architects who will remain nameless because they won't be hassled at the rest of the meeting if you don't agree with their choices. And we, because I will include myself in that group, spent a lot of hours poring over the abstracts to winnow down the number that could be used for the presentations. In fact, as I said, there were about 160 abstracts, and most of us who were on the panel actually read every one of those abstracts and made the decision after a lot of deliberation, both online as well as a face-to-face meeting where the decisions were made. So what you're going to be seeing for the presentations today, as well as in posters and in invited presentations, as a result of that committee's decisions. I think it's good to remind you that the listed abstracts are listed by author's name, last name, in the abstract book, so you can follow them along in the abstract book for the talks that will be individually given. There's a time limit of 15 minutes for each discussion, so we have monitors around the room who will jerk people off the stage when their time is due in a very gentle way. And so I would like to, this is the second of the series of contributed papers. Yesterday we had a series at the very beginning of the meeting, and so the contributed papers for this particular session is, the title is Urban Stress Index, and Martin Knoll will be the presenter. It's from the Department of Architecture at Darmstadt in Germany. Martin, are you available? Sure. Take that, and then let me unclip this.
There's a selection of pointers. Great. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for the introduction. My name is Martin Knöll. I'm from the Department of Architecture in Germany at the University of Darmstadt. I'm very excited to be here. That was a great start already this morning. I would be one of those persons that would be very interested in looking closer into the built environment and what is the effects on people, for example, on people's stress levels, on the kids' stress levels. I lead a research group that's most of it interested into urban design and health. Believe it or not, that's a topic in Germany as well. We're very interested in designing public spaces that are more inviting for people to walk, to become active, but also to, just meet, interact with each other, and as well as relaxing. So this is what we work on. Today I want to talk to you about our studies on, well, what places in a city stress people out, or what places are perceived by people as being stressful. So I want to present you a framework that allows to kind of better describe stress ratings of a certain group of people by just looking at the built environment. So we have retrieved from literature analysis a lot of factors and properties that have been used in the past and have done a small case study in my hometown in Darmstadt that I would like to present to you, so that we've come up with a sort of explorative model that can be used for these things. So this is all of this is a typical public space in Darmstadt, which is like a 150,000 inhabitants town, a small university town, just off Frankfurt. Most of you probably know the airport in Frankfurt. So 40,000 of those 150,000 are students, and this is one of the squares in there. Called Luisenplatz, and of course the town has a lot of a big tram system, a lot of public transport. Basically, people love to use the bike. They walk a lot, but we were interested in kind of what is, so what are stressful places for people, with the aim of kind of like making public spaces more walkable as well and make them better to be in. And well, surprisingly to me, I've just moved to that city, is that space turned out to be the most stressful for them. So this was voted kind of out of a broad scale of places the most stressful place. And we began to wonder, so what are the reasons for this? Of course, for stress perception, and you all know that better than I, there's a lot of reasons. There's personal disposition, there's personal health, there's the situation that you're in this moment, and also the agenda. And we could gain all of this from this questionnaire that we had filled them out. But it was interesting to us, what are the design factors that play probably a small role, but play a role in this kind of sort of question. So this is a case study that we did where we, in order to look into this in more detail, had developed an app with which people could kind of rate different environmental properties. Is that place loud? Is it quiet? Is that place populated, or is it crowded, or is it on the opposite side? Is it like is there nothing going on at all? And we had people kind of give that smartphone on that public space. So this is kind of the Luisenplatz from above on a ground plan. Give them the smartphone and ask, so you please show us the area in that space that you find most relaxing or most stressful. And you see here in kind of green and in red those places, and of course we could track then the GPS, so very spatially detailed, and we could track, of course, the direction that people were facing when they were making photographs. And this is like kind of like really a exploratory study where we used 15 of our students, and they did that. But we couldn't kind of make kind of sense of the data that we got. Of course, you have those arrows that point towards a fountain, for example, saying, okay, this is relaxing. Or pointing those negative points, pointing to like the trams, where we could say, okay, this is some stressful factors. So I began to think like, okay, we really need to look into how can we analyze and how can we describe the built environment in more detail. And I think this is even more important because there's all those really nice studies coming up, exploratory as well, that are using all sorts of biosensors, that are using mobile EEG, that are using heart rate frequency, and I'm sure like a lot of you guys can do this in way more sophisticated ways than we can do it, and we would hope to collaborate with you on that. But of course, because we're architects, we're kind of most interested in the built environment, for that matter. So this is kind of like some sort of a related work, where here you have all those studies, and there's a lot of coming up that I really love to read and love to get first insights on that. But what I realized is that they describe the built environment mostly very contrasting. So they say, well, we have people walking in green spaces, as in contrast to gray spaces. Some of them even go that far and say, look, we have a town, more than 100,000 inhabitants, less than 100,000 inhabitants, so it's not very spatially detailed at all. On the other hand, I think we have a lot of frameworks that are out there to really describe the built environment. One framework that I really love that has been developed at UCL in London in the 80s is the space syntax framework, and I'm sure some of you have worked with that, and I think, so this is kind of the framework that we work with a lot. And we would like to, with this new model that we call, a tool to predict perceived urban stress, we would like to contribute to that field. And ideally, all those studies that work with very good technology to cover stress could potentially use that what we have developed, and vice versa. Okay, so this is the method that we applied in that case study. We have had a sample of 22 public spaces, publicly accessible places in Darmstadt, in a broad kind of 500 meters spectrum across the city. We had 134 students, all architecture students, and which we chose kind of on purpose because they have this sort of sensitivity towards the environment, so we hoped, they can describe the environment very well. Have an online questionnaire in which we asked those questions. So to rate all those 22 places, of which one of the factors was we simply straight ahead asked what places are stressful to you, what places are relaxing to you. So this was kind of the data that we had. And to all of those places, we constructed properties of the built environment, which we retrieved from, going through literature. What has been related to the built environment according to stress so far? This is the framework that we came up with. We broadly divided into 4 factors that might be familiar to the most of you. So one is, of course, building density. It has been theoretized to have an impact on mental health for 100 years or so. Then there's street network. That, of course, comes a lot from the space syntax literature. There's a thing called ISOVIST that has been related to, spatial perception, mostly in indoor spaces so far. There's not been much around for outdoor spaces so far. That is where we kind of moved into newer grounds. And there's a thing called space typology. We roughly categorized into parks, streets with a lot of traffic, streets with not so much traffic, pedestrian zones, squares, and courtyards. So I'm just basically going to talk about these 2 because it's not a lot of time to talk about things today, but also because the results that we gained were probably the most interesting. So our hypothesis was that a street network that is very much integrated, which is a good predictor for car traffic, is of course positive related to perceived stress. Another hypothesis that we draw is from the ISOVIST is that a place that is very complex in its geometry and its shape is perceived as very stressful. A place that is big, that has a lot of area in which I can look into, is perceived as very stressful. Those were only 2 of the hypotheses that we kind of started in this study in. So I'm not sure if all of you are familiar with the way space syntax works. And this is super difficult to kind of explain it within a minute. I'm not going to try it, but I brought this kind of map in order to show it to you. So this is kind of a close-up of the street segments in Darmstadt in black. So there's like streets, but there's also footpaths. And space syntax basically has several factors. One factor that we found is very relevant is a factor that's called integration. So basically, if you pick out one street segment, how well can that be accessed from any other street segment in the system? And well accessed in that case, or well integrated, means that you can go there without changing the direction too often. It can be measured in angles that people have to kind of like turn around to get to one. And this is kind of a measure where you can get, out of one specific street segment, you can get a relative size, how well that is integrated position to any other. So here you find, and then what is interesting is that you can do this in different radius. You can look at the whole street network of the whole city, or you can look at a very small radius. Yeah? So here you have a very small radius, and red indicates a very well integrated segment. Yeah? Green, not so well integrated. And this is a very good predictor, has been waterproof almost in literature, has been a good predictor for pedestrian movement. Yeah? And if you look into this is a big park, this is very red, and if you go there on almost any time in the day, those are where most of the students walk from the bus station to the university. So it's really surprising how well this works. It's been published a lot in many articles. If you look into integration into a bigger radius, let's say look at the whole street network, then it's a great indicator for car traffic. So if you have, this is as well integration, then all of a sudden those street segments become red. And this is, of course, the biggest traffic streets in Darmstadt that you can see. So our hypothesis was, okay, this must relate to how stressful people perceive the open space around it. Yeah, so those were the open spaces where we asked people how stressful it is. Our hypothesis, of course, this relates. It's only 3 minutes left. Oh, wow. Okay, so this is the whole street network. You see that it relates kind of, it's a significant predictor for perceived urban stress just by looking at this, at the street network. This has kind of an advantage because you almost, if you're new in a city and you want to explore, investigate what spaces are stressful, you now only have to look into the street network and you get a good predictor for how stressful certain spaces will be. Okay, and a second thing that I want to touch upon very quickly is a very good factor as well. It's called the isovist. And this is kind of a diagram that shows this. You have an open space, you have a vantage point where people stand, and isovist is this area that you can look into. And you have then several properties with which you can describe the shape and the geometry of that space. You have, of course, the total area. You have the edges. Are those edges closed or are they open? How many vertices do you have? And so on and so forth. So that's a great tool to describe the geometry, the shape of an open space. We have found out that this is a selection of 6 places. You can then as well, this is now vertex number. So how many vertices does an isovist have? This is one that has a lot. This is one that has, in a relation to its area, quite a few, only a few. And this correlates significantly to ratings people of safety, of a place is safe. What we found out, what was surprising to us, is that if you don't look if you look in the vertex number, so you just count the number, then this is significantly related to negatively related to stress. That means that a place that is more complex, that has more kind of edges and facades that are jumping back and forth, that this is actually rated as less stressful. And this is, of course, in line with all those studies about human scale by people like Jan Gehl in Copenhagen and so on. But this is kind of like some empiric data on this. Explorative, but first data. Okay, now I'm going to quick come to an end, I guess. This is the model that we've built with those 4 factors that are explaining the stress ratings with different kind of negative and positive relations. You see here, depending on the radius, you have a negative relation or positive. Most surprising was this ISOVIST factor, a factor called visibility, which is the area that you can look in an open space. But it's ambiguous because it also means the area that can be seen in an open space. And we would have assumed that, okay, the bigger a place is, the less stressful it is perceived, but it's the opposite. Those places in our sample, at least, that have a high visibility, that can be seen from big spaces, they are perceived as stressful. And that's interesting because the literature says actually visibility is one key for pedestrian safety. It's been shown in a lot of studies. The better you can see people, the safer they are. An interesting thing is that they are safer, but they feel more stressed. Those were just a few kind of interesting results of this study. Of course, the study is robust. It shows, kind of the model shows or predicts perceived stress with a variety of 54.6%. It is robust because we used a broad spectrum of places. As I said, parks, open spaces, streets, and so on. But it's also exploratory. Yeah? It's also exploratory because we only used architecture students. Yeah? So the next study, of course, has to look into a broader population. And it would be really interesting how, like, more vulnerable groups, what is their choice and what is their factors of the built environment that can predict their stress very well. But it's also like Darmstadt is representative for like a Central European city. But is it also for like a city with a different climatic background, for like Northern Europe or Southern Europe? Is it also representative for cities with a completely different cultural background? So this will be interesting to kind of like, validate our model and see what are the built environment factors there. Especially it would be interesting to bring this model to the US. We talked about walkability, for example. We have the discussion the other way around. Can we bring those models that have been developed over here, can we apply them in a European city? And we have to do a lot of adjustments and so on. So this will be interesting to do that. Okay, next steps, we'll go back on-site. We'll be on-site testing. We hope we can apply some more biosignals, mobile technology to kind of like, really gain physiological data as well. And then kind of relate it to like our model, which we can visualize as well, kind of like to bring it back to that. And a focus will be on those ISOVIST factors, but because if you look into a public space, and if you look into the reality of planning, there's of course many factors and they're all interrelating, but there's only some factors that you can actually change. So it will be very interesting to look into the interactions between those factors in order to see if you have a precise situation and for example, in this space, you cannot change the traffic. You can only to a certain amount, you can change the shape of that space. But you can then kind of moderate with effects such as vegetation or the furniture and so on and so forth. So I think we will focus our research much on ISOVIST, on what are people seeing. Okay, for a long-term vision, and I'll finish now, it would be interesting to work on a design guideline for urban design and mental health. Potentially we can contribute to this. Thank you very much for your attention.
May I ask if Dr. Fick is in the audience? In that case, we have a chance for, is that? Oh, you are, okay, because we thought you hadn't arrived, so, I'm sorry. So I'm afraid we don't have any time for questions then. Okay. We have to talk to him. One question.
First of all, congratulations on using Teach, technical functional with Darmstadt. Wonderful to see such great work being done.
Thank you very much.
Okay. I can explain your results on ISOVIST, and I applaud you for using and for using isovis theory and for using spatial syntax, which are two of my favorite methods of analysis. The isovis theory, what's going on there with it's the long views that are driving the stress, because basically it means the people have to maintain an orienting function to long distances. And we've seen this in other work that we've done. And this connects to a neural theory called neural reserve. And those two literatures come to fit together very, very nicely. I mean, this is one thing you can trace right back down to a neural basis. So I'll talk to you more later, but thank you. It's a wonderful presentation.